Claire Bennett had no intention of leaving her apartment that evening. But the stillness inside her small Seattle living room felt heavier than the overcast sky beyond the window, and the quiet pressed against her chest until she could no longer remain motionless. So she pulled on a jacket, ignored the unread messages on her phone, and stepped into the cool evening air with the simple notion of walking until her thoughts quieted down. Before I unfold the rest of this night, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It really does help more than you know, and if you're drawn into stories like this, I want you here for every one of them. Also tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, or in a city where the lights never quite go dark? She chose Willow Creek Park because it was nearby and familiar, yet distant enough from her recent memories. As she walked, the streets were nearly deserted, storefront lights dimmed, vehicles scarce. The city felt suspended, as if holding its breath alongside her. She noticed how the night sharpened everything. The sound of her footsteps, the fragrance of damp leaves, the ache in her heart that stemmed from a separation she kept insisting she had moved past, but clearly hadn't. When she reached the park entrance, she hesitated momentarily because it felt unusual to enter such a quiet place alone after dark. But something drew her forward, a need to keep moving. To avoid returning to the walls that knew her sadness too intimately, the park welcomed her with soft lamplight and long shadows stretching across the pathway. Trees standing like silent observers. The pond barely visible except for faint reflections of the moon. She walked briskly at first, hands buried in her pockets, head lowered, attempting not to think, until she noticed a figure ahead, seated on a bench near the water. This slowed her pace because the park was otherwise empty, and her initial instinct was to turn around. But then she observed that the man was elderly, sitting upright with calm patience, gently tossing small fragments of bread toward the dark water as if the ducks could still perceive him. There was nothing threatening about him, only a quiet presence that felt unexpectedly comforting. As Claire passed, she sensed his eyes lift, not sharp or inquisitive but warm. He smiled at her in a way that carried no expectation, no demand, just a soft acknowledgement. Something in that simple gesture unlocked a place in her chest she didn't realize was sealed. Because lately people either looked through her or at her with questions she was too exhausted to answer. Without planning to, she sloped, turning slightly as if the night itself had nudged her. The man spoke first, his voice steady and kind. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" She answered before thinking. "It really is," surprised by how effortless it felt to speak. In that brief exchange, the park seemed less vacant, the darkness less burdensome. Claire realized that this walk, meant only to escape her own thoughts, had quietly shifted into something else entirely. Something she could not yet identify, but already sensed would stay with her long after the night concluded. Claire stood beside the bench longer than she anticipated, the evening air brushing past her face as if encouraging her to remain. When the elderly man shifted slightly to create space without asking, she sat down, surprised at herself for not overthinking it. The bench felt cold but steady, grounding her. The man introduced himself as Walter Harrison with a courteous nod, his voice calm and clear, the kind that carried decades of patience. Claire shared her name, keeping it simple, uncertain why she felt secure offering even that much. Their conversation began in small steps, moving quickly yet gently, like two people who had waited a long time to be heard. They discussed the park, the way it transformed after sunset, how night stripped life down to its honest parts. Walter spoke with care, selecting words slowly but never dragging them out, explaining that he came to the park frequently at night, because the noise of the day made it difficult to think. Claire admitted she walked, because staying still hurt more than moving. The truth of that surprised her as it left her mouth. Instead of reacting with pity or advice, Walter simply nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant, which made her chest tighten in a way that felt close to relief. The conversation moved swiftly from small talk to meaning without effort, as if the darkness had removed the usual walls people constructed. Claire found herself sharing how her long relationship had ended quietly, not with shouting or betrayal, but with distance and tired love, the kind that fades without warning. She spoke without tears, without drama, just facts. Yet each word carried weight. Walter listened fully, his body turned toward her, his eyes focused but gentle. When she finished, he did not rush to speak, letting the silence settle, a silence that did not judge. When he did respond, he said something simple. Some endings hurt more precisely because no one is at fault. That thought struck Claire deeply because it named the pain she had been unable to explain. She looked at him then, really looked, Noticing the lines on his face that spoke of time rather than hardship, his neat scarf, his steady hands, she sensed that he carried his own history without needing to display it. As if reading her curiosity, Walter shared that he had once been a professor. That words had mattered to him his entire life. That listening was the most important lesson he ever learned. Claire laughed softly at that, surprised again by how natural it felt. The night continued around them unnoticed as minutes slipped into an hour. The pond dark and still, the lamps humming quietly. Their conversation moved through memories and feelings without slowing, touching on loneliness, on how people feared it but rarely admitted it. Claire confessed she felt invisible since her separation, like the world kept moving while she stood frozen. Walter answered that invisibility often arrived when someone had spent too long being seen only through another person. That healing meant learning to stand alone again. His words were not sharp or heavy, just clear. Claire felt something inside her shift, not fixed but understood. She realized this was no longer a strange encounter, but a meaningful one. When she finally stood to leave, feeling the late hour settle in her bones, she felt both lighter and uncertain, because she did not want the moment to end, yet knew it had to. Walter stood as well, wishing her a safe walk home. His smile warm but restrained. As she walked away, she felt the pull of turning back, knowing that this brief connection, built only on words and shared understanding, had already changed the night into something she would carry with her. She sensed without proof that this would not be their last conversation. Claire returned to the park the following evening without overthinking it, her steps quicker, her heart oddly alert. She found Walter already there, standing near the pond under a dim lamp, as if the place itself remembered him. When he saw her, his smile carried quiet surprise, not excitement but recognition. They walked together this time instead of sitting, moving along the path while the night wrapped around them. Walter began to speak, not slowly, not cautiously, but honestly, as if something inside him had decided it was time. He told her about Eleanor, his wife, his partner, his constant for 43 years. He explained how they met young, built a life through ordinary days, shared small habits that became sacred. Claire listened closely as his words flowed without pause, describing love not as passion but as choice, patience, laughter after long days, forgiveness after misunderstandings. He spoke of loss with clarity rather than pain, explaining that grief did not always shout. It often whispered when least expected. He described how after Eleanor passed, the house felt too large. Time felt loose. Nights became the hardest because memory worked best in the dark. Claire felt every sentence land inside her, not because she shared his story, but because she understood the shape of his longing. As they stopped near a bench, Walter explained that this park was where he and Eleanor used to walk after dinner. Planning nothing, just being together. Coming here now helped him feel close without breaking apart. Claire felt tears rise but stayed quiet, letting him speak. He told her that love never truly departs. It only changes form, that some connections were meant to heal rather than last. As he said that, he looked at her with gentle knowing. Not romantic, not distant, but human. Claire realized that what she felt was not attraction in the usual sense, but a deep emotional pull, a feeling of being seen by someone who asked nothing from her. She shared then how afraid she was of starting over, how the idea of opening her heart again felt exhausting. Walter answered quickly, telling her that fear meant she still cared. And caring was not weakness. It was proof of life. They sat down together, shoulders close but not touching, watching the water ripple softly. The night seemed to pause for them. Walter spoke about aging, about how time taught him what mattered and stripped away what didn't, how regret faded, but love stayed sharp. Claire felt her own pain shift, not disappear, but settle into something softer. When she finally looked at him again, she saw not an elderly man, but a person shaped by love and loss who still chose connection. That realization stayed with her. When it was time to leave, Walter reached into his coat and handed her a small folded paper with a passage written in neat handwriting, about moving forward even when the path felt unclear. Claire accepted it like a gift, understanding that this meeting was not meant to transform into something else, but was complete as it was. As they stood and said goodnight, there was no promise of tomorrow. No spoken plan, just a shared look that carried respect and quiet care. As Claire walked home, she felt changed. Not because she had fallen in love, but because she had been reminded that love existed in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful connections were brief, honest, and perfectly timed. Claire kept returning to Willow Creek Park after that night, sometimes without thinking, sometimes because her heart felt restless again. Each visit carried a quiet hope, not desperate, but open, On some evenings Walter was there, seated on the same bench, walking the same path. They spoke as if no time had passed. Never rushing, never holding back, sharing thoughts about life, change, regret, and acceptance. Their conversations moved fast and deep, skipping small talk, because they both understood time differently now. There was no confusion about what they were to each other. No blurred lines. Only connection built on honesty and care. Then one night Claire arrived and the bench was empty, the lamp glowing alone. She waited longer than usual, watching the path, listening to the wind, but Walter did not appear. She felt a soft disappointment, but not panic, trusting his reasons. She came back the next night, and the next. Still he was gone. On the fourth evening, she noticed a folded note placed carefully on the bench where he always sat. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, reading his words. He thanked her for listening, for reminding him the world was still kind. He encouraged her to keep walking forward, to keep loving without fear. The message felt complete, like a farewell wrapped in gratitude. Claire sat there for a long time, letting the meaning settle, realizing he had given her something lasting without staying. As weeks passed, she stopped searching for him. Not out of forgetting, but understanding. Slowly her life shifted. She slept better, smiled more, took longer walks in daylight, spoke more openly with friends. The ache of her past love softened into memory. Years later, walking through the same park on a warm evening, Claire felt calm instead of lonely, grateful instead of empty. She understood that Walter had not been a romance, but a turning point, a quiet guide who helped her see herself again. As she passed the bench, she smiled, knowing some people enter our lives briefly, not to stay but to change us. And that realization felt like love in its purest form. If this story touched something inside you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this remind us that the most meaningful connections don't always last forever. Sometimes they just arrive exactly when we need them. Thank you for being here.